balance of high biodiversity that we work in.
Great. Thank you all. Very interesting. Now we will be moving on with Annette and Brian, who will entertain us, I'm sure, talking about data systems.
Alrighty, thanks, Charles. Here, everyone. I'll just share my screen and get something. Charles, can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, hi, we're changing gears quite a bit from political risk to technology, but there we go. Going to cover a project that we've been running pretty much since the retreat last May, called the Data Systems Project. It started through some conversations I was having with Giselle and Kari at Puget Sound and a bunch of other people, talking about the systems we have in place and the gaps that we have, and pondering the question about how do we get the systems we need? How do we go about improving what we have when none of us really have the capacity to do a lot of this ourselves? So as I mentioned, it started with a workshop at the retreat. We did a survey beforehand of quite a few members to think about what systems people were using, what gaps they identified, what might be a path forward. Lots of people on the call now were at that retreat, if you can recall back to then. The conversations we had during the workshop and prior to it were reflecting on where we'd come from and what we had in place. So recognizing that way back in the very early days of CMP, a bunch of members sort of had a bit of a vision for creating technology to support the work that we're doing using the open standards. And they pitched in sort of time and money to start building things, which resulted in Marathi and a bunch of other bits and pieces that really have stood the test of time. 10 years on, in the world of technology, it's unusual for things to last so long and keep going. But now those things are still in place. All those categorization systems they set up are still in place, through testament to the vision that was way back then. And so we talked about 10 years have passed at least. What do we do now to sort of plan for the next 10 years? So we kicked off the conversation at the workshop, talked about the systems we had, as I mentioned, and then how do we fill gaps? We talked about, do we need to build more function into Marathi? Do we need to build whole new systems to support that? Do we need to go and talk to people who already have systems that do particular things like project planning or work planning or budget management or whatever? Talk to those developers and see if they can expand their systems to cater for the things that we need. We ended up with a rather lots of ideas, but no clear way as to how to go about it. But we, within the context of the workshop, we identified the key areas that we were all interested in having better systems for. So monitoring, work planning and reporting were the real top lines. Then the systems to support how we manage grants, and then the particular functions around land management, organisations like land trusts and the like that are actually trying to manage the process of identifying and managing new lands. We chose those as our key topics. We identified a bunch of other things like data standards and evidence libraries, and they're all kind of related into this picture as well, but haven't really launched on into those. So we picked those 5 subjects to deal with. People put their hand up to be involved, and a lot of those folks are on the call, so it's great for you all to be involved. And we've been running a bunch of work streams ever since, and by my rough count, over 40 people and 28 organisations have been involved in this project. So big thanks to everyone who's been helping, and a particular thanks to Brian, who's on the call, and some of his colleagues at Sitka. When we came out of the workshop, Jill and I were talking about how do we make this happen? How do we do something? We realised that a few of us had recently been through a process at Sitka Drive, a systems analysis process called a data diagnostic, and it worked well for these particular organisations. So I talked to Brian, and know if he regrets it, but he agreed to help. And ever since, we've been running a very cut down version of a process that I quite like, because it's talking about how to design systems or identify what systems you need, but it doesn't talk about technology. It talks about people and what are the tasks that people do and what are those workflows around those tasks, and focuses right in on all that before even thinking about systems or technology or widgets or whatever. So the work we've done so far is around looking at the people and the workflows in these 5 subject areas. The way we did that was running some online brainstorming sessions where we asked people to think about what are the tasks within the subject area. So if we're talking about monitoring, what are the monitoring tasks that people in your organization do? And we got those phrased in a particular way. So people were thinking about, as a user of this type, so a field worker, perhaps, I need to do a task. So I need to collect some data, say, in order to achieve a goal. So collect some data in order to understand the volume of invasive species on their site or whatever it is. But in collecting the information in this way, we were able to identify the tasks, the people that are doing the tasks, and why they're doing the tasks, focusing really in on the goals. So that from that information in those brainstorming sessions, we're able to discern the tasks and start putting them into workflows, and also discern the roles, the particular roles in all these different organizations, and group those up into a concept called personas that Brian and co use quite well, which is trying to move away from the concept of particular people and particular roles into groupings of roles that have a particular goal. And so we've taken everyone's ideas in these brainstorming sessions and turned them into tasks and workflows and a concept of personas, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Then we got everyone back together again with another online tool to do a sorting exercise, 2 rounds through all the tasks to sort them into how people thought that, how critical those tasks were to their organization, and the gap. What's the opportunity for improving the way that task works? So a lot of information came through all of those conversations in the 5 different subject areas. And what we've done is document these into a format called a broadsheet. And I'll pop a link up in a moment where you can take a look at this more closely. But I'll go through monitoring as just one example. In the interest of time, just touch on the others. But the first thing we identified around the tasks were these concepts of personas. So trying to think around what are the generic types of roles that are applying across our organizations. And on the right-hand side, you might see some particular roles that are defined roles within the organizations of the people that were contributing, but grouping those up into sort of a more abstract concept that's geared around achieving a particular goal. Had a bit of fun along the way, picking an animal to try and depict what the goal might be. My personal favourite's the octopus, the data steward, who needs 8 arms to try and get their hands around all the information they're trying to wrangle. But coming up with these really helped us to sort of focus in on who are the people trying to do this work, and what is it they're trying to achieve, what's the goal. We then set about the workflow. So for monitoring, we had 5 broad workflows and then a whole bunch of tasks, and you can sort of see how the volume spreads across these, but a whole lot of tasks that people had identified within those workflows within their organizations. And then through the sorting exercise, came up with a whole bunch of different visuals, but a key one for us, so moving forward, is often called the magic quadrant. It's plotting the opportunity for improvement and then the criticality to the organization, so that the tasks that are appearing in the top right are areas we can focus on, in this case, monitoring. If all these links work, I'll just show you this resource that's available for each of the subject areas. So what's in the broadsheet is an image. What's online is an interactive one where you can query much more detail about, what are the tasks, what are people trying to achieve. So the task sounds simple, use monitoring data, but the goal here is particularly around evaluating a program and the persona is a monitor. You can use the controls to just look at a particular workflow or just look at the tasks of a particular person and start to see a bit more information about the analysis that we've done. And if you want to use any of this in your own environment, when you get something that you want, you can download the image or the data or a PDF or whatever, and be putting this kind of stuff into something that you might want to use within your own organizations. And there's bunches of different tabs here that are all doing different pieces of analysis. But, so what we've done is looked through each of the subject areas and collated the information into these broadsheets. So monitoring was a key one. Work planning is another. Again, there's the personas there, all the tasks and how they're falling out, and what we're seeing as the priorities for the work planning area. Reporting, again, lots of interest in how do we not just manage the information we've got, but get it out to people in a way that's useful for decision making. So we've got some priorities around reporting. Grant management, we took a slightly different tack to it. We're not going to try and build a grant management system, but we recognise that, and this is the image at the top right, that there's workflows on a grant maker's side, a funder's side, and a grantee, an organisation's side. And if we can make the information flow more smoothly between those two different systems in two different organisations, then there'd be quite a bit of efficiency to gain and probably a whole lot better quality data as well. So grant making, we tried to look at the interface between the two different organisations and what we might do to improve there, and we've got a bunch of ideas for that. And then land management, this is a bit more involved in that it pretty much covers the whole project, but the focus particularly was on the early stages of identifying land to protect, and then the actual process of buying or securing that land in some way, and a whole bunch of tasks there that we think are priorities for systems improvement. So all that information is available in the broadsheet. There's also a Visio file there for anyone who wants to poke into this and start using it perhaps in their own organisations. They're available for reference, and I'm happy to chat offline after this if anyone's got any questions on that. But what we wanted to focus the conversation on now and get your feedback on is how do we move all this forward? We've got some great ideas for things that need improving. How do we make it happen? It's the age-old question, how do we get the systems we need? So a few of us have got together and come up with a bit of a theory of change about how we think we might do this, and keen to get your thoughts on whether this is viable, are there things missing, whether you're interested in participating, all that sort of thing. So just to walk through the chain, what we're trying to do at the far right here is fill these gaps that we have in the system. So we're just calling it a module for want of a better word. But ultimately, we want more systems or modules in place, user-supported, helping us do our work. To do that, we've got to get this system or a module developed. For that to happen, working backwards, we've got to have a plan for how we're going to go about doing that. And we need some organisations interested in helping to collaborate. We're running on the principle that no one organisation amongst us kind of has a lot of money to throw at this sort of stuff, but if collectively we can put our minds and time and resources into this, we might be able to make it happen. So just building on one of these boxes now, the development of the plan has to be around not just the technology plan, but what are the features that we're needing in this system, but also what's the operating model, the business plan for actually making sure that this is viable in the long term. No point building a system and making it run and then having it all fall apart the next day. So it's got to be long-term viable. So there's a bit of work to do around just framing up how to do it. But the important piece in my mind is the coalition of the willing, the people that might be interested in this particular module, and no doubt we'll need several different ones, but subject area based. If there are people within organisations that are proponents wanting to fill this gap that they have, then often the proponents are people like you and me. We're not the decision makers on what technology the organisation uses, so there has to be some way of making that case internally within the organisation to the decision makers around technology that there's a gap here it needs to be filled. There's these other people interested in filling it. Can we talk? Ideally, then decision makers might step up to play. Ideally, then we might have 3 or 4 organisations interested in developing this particular module, whatever it might be. And they can either kick in their own resources or help in some sort of fundraising way so that we start to get the resources to make this happen. There's a key condition outside of our control in that the timing for this has to be right for the organisation. Sometimes it's just not right. The organisation is not contemplating any sort of systems improvement. But assuming that those planets can align, we're hoping we can get some interest. And then we can move on to the mechanics of actually building the module, whatever it is, and I'd be confident we could do that. We've done that before. That's a more understood process. It's these early 2 steps. So we've mapped out some activities that could be performed. This bottom area, again, confident we can do that. We've done that before. The top area is where I think a whole bunch of individuals, people want help in how do I make this stuff happen. So started to map out some potential actions that individuals could take once somebody sort of identifies themselves as interested in this. It's really about developing a roadmap for conversations within that organisation before we can come out the other end. So it's figuring out who the decision makers are, what's going to move them, what's going to make them interested in this work. Perhaps showing elements of the broadsheet might help to show that there's been some good analysis already done, that there's some general broad scale interest here, there's a shared need for this stuff. Hoping that kind of information helps to get people interested, and then ultimately perhaps we can be having conversations with these decision makers about what's involved, how can we make this happen, do you want to play? And then there's a overriding kind of coordination that I think the working group we have in place can keep on doing. But that's a whole lot of work mapped out in quite a hurry, but I'm curious to throw it open and have any comments from anyone who might be interested in this space, and whether you think this is a viable approach or if you've got better ideas or different ideas. Throw it open for conversation. I think we've got 10 minutes, have we, Charles?
Yes. Yes, sorry. I was looking for the unmute button.
Right.
This is Rebecca from Bush Heritage. Annette, I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing that. And as many of you know, Annette's obviously guided Bush Heritage through our own system analysis with Brian, which was incredibly helpful. And I fully recommend undertaking that program if you're trying to figure out the tools, the technological tools to help you through with your operations. I think Bush Heritage would certainly be interested in being one of the organisations, and I think we have an interesting opportunity in Australia at the moment. There's more collaboration with all of the Australian environmental NGOs now than there ever has been before, partly because of the fires, but just because of the general zeitgeist, but also increased collaboration with the government. And we've been working a lot with what used to be the Department of Environment, and it's now the Department of Sports and Entertainment and, you know, everything else. But, sorry, slightly facetious, but yeah. I think there's a real opportunity that the government is seeing that there's a need for minimum environmental data uptake, and that requires data standards. So, you know, if we could find the all-important resources, as you say, Annette, I think there's a real opportunity in Australia right now.
Cool, that's great news.
So Annette, this is Giselle. In the bottom left, in the group box initial plan developed for each module, what do you mean by module in this? Yeah,
so it depends what we want it to be. So recognizing that out of all the opportunities for improvement we've identified through the work to date, they can group up in different ways. So an example that we've talked about is within work planning, there's potentially improvements that could go into Marathi as a base product, for example. But there's also work planning tools out there. So if that was a module, then what is it, based on the opportunities we've identified, that we really need to build in work planning, and how would we go about that? Do we go and analyse other work planning tools that are out there and pick what we think is the best and run off and talk to the developers of those and see if they'll support our work? Or
Nick, maybe the more simple answer to your question, Giselle, though, is that it's really the 5 areas that Annette kind of showed the broadsheets for. So we could do this for the land management, we could do this for the work planning, we could do this for the reporting. But the whole point of this is you need 3 to 5 groups to step up to do any one of those modules that we're talking about.
Gotcha. Well, I'll just say, and I've told you this before, Annette, that we're definitely very interested in the work planning and evaluation piece. So really the work planning, very, very important. And trying to get movement on that in my organization has been difficult. Everybody recognizes it's important, but I'm definitely interested in, especially in the presenting the case and getting some movement and support from our organization is really key. And I definitely am very much a proponent of, it takes time, money, people to invest in asking the question, okay, for the things that we identified that seem to be a priority, what's the best alternative? That there's, this suite of alternatives, the ways we could attack this, and does an answer already exist that we just didn't know about,
Yeah, and that's
and if I could be really blunt, I mean, I think the very first step here, the proponents are all of us on the call, right? That's what we're aiming for. Someone here who's willing to go to your org and make that case and step up and see if you can join.
Right, but I need to, right, and I'm willing to be one of those organizations, Nick, and I just think among those people, it's like, what's the approach? What's your collective approach when you're trying to nudge your leadership to play?
So I'm interested to be, of course, another person to contribute here, because my organization already has been investing in all sorts of decision support systems at different scales. We're struggling with some of it at the internal organizational scale. We're setting up decision support systems now with the local partners in government, for example, to implement some specific conservation plans. And I think there's a lot of value here, and I love that statement that it's not about technology, it's about workflows, and it's about people. And we might run into some challenges, like right now we are doing in Tanzania. The government is completely, it's not about logic anymore, it's about local power and ownership, and so any logic approaches doesn't work. But still, they're having some standards and good practices about advising these workflows and helping with the thinking and conceptualization would be so useful. And I'm happy, to contribute what we have been coming up with, and I'm already have been learning from your presentation. So I think it will be useful for us. And of course, as a CMP organization, we are committed to align the system to conservation standards, right? So
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
be interesting.
Cool. So, anybody else to speak? I think we've only got a couple of minutes, have we, Charles?
I think we still have 2 minutes, and I have a question.
Go for it.
I'm not sure if I have an idea, but I'm not sure if it's already in your action plan. So if we maybe we go back to one of the charts, the magic charts.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about how many of us have started thinking about how we can adopt Marathi to do better work planning. It was often just looking at or seeing presentations from how UNET and Bush Heritage started using and hacking Marathi and finding fixes to make it happen, even if it wasn't like very elegant at first, but just have this like proof of concept. So would it help if like we would pick like, I don't know, like number 26 and 25 and just say like, who's got some sort of a system that somehow makes it work, but it's not super elegant, just to get the ball rolling and make those problems or solutions a bit more concrete?
I think that's certainly something we could do. I think to Giselle's point, and I know from talking with others, sorry to jump the screen around, but helping each other be the proponent based on what each of us have learned and what we're struggling with. There's like a communal support network there, I think, would help folks just know how to, or get some ideas about how to navigate within their organisations. Because a really key chain in my mind is this top chain. If that's not happening, we're not going to be able to move forward. So I know we're pretty much out of time. Don't have a direct next step as much as I'd like to, but I am interested in talking to people who have any interest at all in this, or want to know more, or really just want to start to think about how they might tackle this. As I mentioned, the broadsheet and the Visio document, if you want it, is available. It's on our workspace. I'll pop that in the chat box now as we're leaving, but just down here are the links to the broadsheet, and take perhaps a look at that. Come back to me if you've got any questions at all, but particularly if you're interested in being involved in this next phase as we work out just what is it that we can do with all this. But lastly, I'd like to just thank everyone who's been helping me with this. It's been a really great effort from a whole bunch of people, and interesting work. So yeah, I'll just try and get this in the chat box so we can see it. Yeah.
I'm putting it in the notes too.
Yeah, great, thanks.
And thank you for the leadership here. It's been wonderful working on this.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for your support. It's been really good. You can't get that to send, Caroline. I don't know why.
Okay, I'll put it. Well, I'll put it in the chat box now, and I will also put it in the note.
Yep.
All right. Well, congratulations for pulling all this together. Huge amount of work.
Yeah, that's cool. It's been good fun.
So I think that's it. Caroline, do you want to provide a closing remark? Or?
Well, mainly just a thank you to everybody for participating, to you, Charles, for emceeing, and it's great to have some of our CCNet colleagues on the call too. Glad you guys can make these sessions, and there were some great ideas that came up during this the call, and so I'll be following up with individuals to try to see how we put them in action, and definitely plan on another call in June, and we'll get out a save the date calendar invite in the next few weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Always.
Thanks.
Thanks again. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.